Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I feed you all. We typically have a get together at the end just to kind of celebrate the end of the semester. Uh, all right, all right. So thank you all so very much. I hope that everyone don't have class today on except for my class. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean it was and everything. And so I wanted to make sure that we did like a review. Okay? Because I want because starting next week you all are going to really get into developing your assignments and here and be ready to turn them. Okay. And then I did extend the due date, March 2nd, just because I know and then in my other class, some of them didn't get a chance to just because of weather and different things happening. So, um, but just remember your discussion is also due then. So, community impact study review of the concepts and the concepts that we've covered so far. Okay, some key concepts. We're going to review the key concepts, and I want this to be very interactive. So if you have examples, or if you want to talk about your particular community and topic and everything, feel free, and then we'll discuss it as a class. Okay. So key concepts review, exploring your community and your target systems. That was your first activity that you all got. Okay. You all got finished that and completed that, and you all should have your feedback from me. Windshield survey and asset map is coming up, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that, what that looks like, what some different ideas that you may have, and we can talk about what that looks like. And then collaborating with HSOs. I know that the assignment says assessing an HSO, and typically when you hear about that, and then you're going to the agencies and you may say, well, we have to do a assessment of an HSO. That typically scares organizations and everything. And so you want to know just about their services and things like that for that organization and how to engage with that organization, what what purpose that organization um, actually serves during your community assessment. They are your primary change agent that you're going to be working with and collaborating. Okay, is the human service organizations that are in the community. Okay, so I wanted to just do a quick review of some key concepts and different things. Some when you practice macro practice primarily, there's some key things that you're looking for. Okay, so you're gathering information. You've already done it, and you're going to continue to do that. You're looking at your community from various aspects. You're looking at it from a research standpoint, maybe from looking at the maps. We looked at Google Earth and Google Maps and everything, maybe looking at the maps. Maybe and you will talk to organizations or look at the organizations that are in the community. You will also be kind of walking through all of that information. Effective problem conceptualization. So that means defining your problem. A lot of times, the social issues that we deal with are very sensitive, and people don't want to, may or may not want to hear about it, and or it may be stigmatized even in that community and with people outside of, say, social work. That there may be some stigmatization that still exists. So defining your problem and humanizing your problem is key, especially when you're talking about child abuse, things like domestic violence, things like that. everyone seems to, kind of, they can empathize with those. But when you start talking about formerly incarcerated, when you start talking about poverty, especially in this country where it's, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And there was a comedian online that was saying that would be easy if we had the bootstraps, but first we need the bootstraps, right? To be able to do that. And so effectively defining the problem in your community assessment. Issue framing, framing that issue. Say, a lot of you all, we talked about poverty. Poverty is so big, right? And it may not have been your class, but maybe the other class that was doing the same thing at the same time. Maybe it was the other class that they were talking about poverty in Dallas. So Dallas is a big place, and it has several different, a multitude of different communities and neighborhoods that are there. And so poverty looks different depending on what neighborhood you're in, right? We typically, I'll say poverty. What are the poverty indicators of the community, right? And some of those poverty indicators are lack of affordable housing, lack of health care, um, lack of food, they live in a food desert, all of those different things, right? So we can name them, and to us, right? To us, we know what those mean. We know what those key concepts mean. But community members and or community organizations and community partners uh, and collaborators, those that we collaborate in the community may not know what that means. So really issue framing, make sure that your issue is narrow enough and you have enough statistics to support that it is a problem in the community. Okay. Because if it's not a problem, or if they don't see it as a problem, then why try to come up with a solution? Okay. Mobilizing and leveraging resources around accessibility and equity. So we're leveraging the resources. That's what you're doing with with your windshield survey. You're identifying all of the resources, all of the things that are in the community, and then in your asset map, then you're turning around and really looking at the assets that will support and that you can leverage for your change. Okay. So what is the distinction? Your windshield survey is everything in your community. Residential, where are the residential areas? And this is very, very important. Where are the residential areas in, when you're looking at the liquor store or the convenience store or the discounted grocery store without that does not contain the the necessary healthy food options, right? You want to know where they are because that goes into looking at accessibility and equity in the community. If it's way across town, if there's no transportation, then we've created another problem instead of finding a viable solution. Okay. Strategic planning, that's part of locality development. So that's what you all are doing. You're looking at the assets. Locality development is looking at the resources that are available to the community. Social planning and social action. So that's all part of that strategic plan. Looking at that's what you all are doing, and you're developing an advocacy and major findings from that community. Okay. Then targeted action or advocacy. We'll get into this more and we'll go over this more. There's several different, I think it's the chapters 12, 13, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there, where it talks about the different types of advocacy. So there's grassroots advocacy. That's the advocacy, boots on the ground, that's right there in the community with the community members. That may be protests, that may be marches, that may be other awareness activities and everything that are directly in the community. Other grassroots is find it, or when you identify the organizations that are in the community, working with them to build programs and or services, right? Um, I think I told you all a little bit about Dr. Rogers and her class work with the men of Nehemiah um, around mental health and substance misuse that's in Dallas. And so they presented at our community service learning networking event that we had. And so they presented there. And the things that the students came up with, they've already started implementing that and it's seeing some positive change in what they're doing. So there's a possibility, especially when you take this to, you're going to be talking to some of the representatives and other places, City Hall, other places in which you're going to be gathering information. And then you can also share that with them at the end. Okay. Evaluation and practice is we have processes, right? So we have processes, and as part of that process, we always go to monitoring and evaluation. Why? What purpose does monitoring and evaluation serve as we practice, no matter which level of practice you. Yes, yes. It gauges how well it's doing. Is it effective? And it also allows for us to put in improvement instead of, so a lot of times in communities, what happens is if they cannot identify or find the participants for the services and everything, they just cut off the program, right? But a lot of times that's because they don't have an evaluation plan. They don't know how they haven't put anything in place because that's typically done when you develop the program or the service or the project. Evaluation is put in there. How are we going to make sure that what we're doing is doing the right thing and that it's helping the community? And if it's not, how do we fix it without taking away the whole program or without closing down the grocery store? Instead of closing down the mom and pop store in the community, right? Instead of closing down the mom and pop store, what we're going to do is work with that mom and pop, because when we close down that mom and pop store, what we're going to do is put in a discounted store anyway that still doesn't have the fresh fruits and vegetables that we need, the healthy foods that we need. So why not work with the mom and pop store that's already there? That's typically a staple in the community because that's a family that has a grocery store or whatever, and that's where a lot of the even larger ones started, was in specific communities. Building relationships and collaborations to create positive change. We always want that. So, but again, building those relationships and those collaborations, what does that look like? And I want you all to think about this in your groups. Okay. What collaborations? Because part of your assessing an HSO is to identify some of the partnerships that they already have. Because guess what? You can leverage their networks. If you have a relationship with that organization or with two organizations, then you also have the capacity of all of those other networks. Make sense? Okay. And then change agents for a structural change. That's who we are. We're looking for structural systemic type of change in the community. That's why you're going to look at overt and covert things in the community, such as churches on every corner. But there's only what, a few blocks of that's considered the community. A plethora of churches that then if there's too many churches, what happens? you have, say, 8,000 community members. Typically, there's about 40% of those who actually will attend church services on a regular basis. But if they have a church if they go out their door and they have 5 or 6 churches, then which one?
Some six, like 5, 6 churches, like literally right next to each other, and then one is now a demolished project being rebuilt. But I haven't seen it in person yet, but
Uh-huh.
I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, because it splits the community members up. If we're trying to bring them together and so help them to socialize, find places to socialize, right? Production, distribution, consumption, right? Socialization, social control, all of those functions of the community. If we have too many churches or too many liquor stores or too many of those things, those things that all the community members cannot use or does not use, then we're fracturing the community. Our goal is to put that community together. How do we collaborate and get the resources and accessibility to resources that we need as a community? If you live in that community, you pay to live in that community, which typically we all do, you need that community to work for you. And if it doesn't, what are you going to do? The community, if your community today, think about it, if your community where you live right now did not take care of or did not meet the needs that you have, what would you do? Move. What was? Yeah, find a new one. But think about the population that are impacted. Can they move like that? Typically not. Typically they are stuck there in that community, even though that community is not working. Okay. Questions, comments? Okay. Chapter 2. We're talking more around purposeful type of change. So on purpose, we're going into these communities, we're examining these communities on purpose because we see something that needs to be changed in the community. Or we, at this point, you all have seen some of those things that need to be changed. But initially, it was something, this is a community that you may have looked at, they may have a median income of $17,000 a year, way below the poverty line, right? So we know there's something going on, that there's going to be some lack in that. Or you have high incidence of domestic violence. You have high rates of teenage pregnancy. You have high rates of um, high blood pressure, and others. We know there's something going on in those communities. Tell me this, how did you all choose in your groups? How did you all choose? Whoever wants to share. How did you all choose your group? When you got in your groups, how did you all choose? Yes, what you're familiar with, most definitely. We are all, 9 times out of 10, we all have communities that we've driven through, or communities that we know of, right? And there's those typical communities, Stock Six, Lancaster Avenue, Street, South Dallas. What is it called? Roseland or Rosewood? Rosedale. Rosedale, Como. There's communities that we're familiar with. What's some other reasons why you chose the community you chose? Yes, or you heard something about the community. Or like you said, you've been around the area and you just never know that, hey, this little pocket of poverty. A few years ago, we want to give all of these fancy names to things. Pockets of poverty or communities of poverty. And typically those communities of poverty are surrounded by more affluent. And if you're in the middle and you see all of this opulence around you, right? But you don't have it, what does that say to you as a community? You don't matter. That's exactly what it says. And it's up to macro practitioners going in those communities and saying, they do matter. This is what's going on in your community because a lot of times it's around awareness. They're unaware or don't know that, or may have lived in that type of neighborhood and don't know that those resources should be part of their need to have healthy food options, to have programs and services that are there to meet the needs of the community members. Because the community members are keeping up the community, right? If there was no community members, there wouldn't be a community. So strategically, we're looking at organizational change, community change, and societal change. Those are typically the three areas of change that we're looking especially when we're looking at community. So organizational change around the organizations that are in the community, right? Changing them, changing the community itself, raising awareness, social action and social planning and social action, and then societal change. So we're looking at how do we look at populations, like your target population? How do you help them? Because if you can come up with a viable solution, you assess the community, you come up with a viable solution, guess what? That should be able to be replicated with some modification because different communities look different. But that same process of looking at that community and assessing that community can be replicated for another community and another community and another community. And then the process is we analyze it first, an overall analysis of the situation one, which changed. So as far as your communities, that's what you're doing now. You're exploring the community, you're researching the community, you're looking at the organizations, and you're doing a windshield survey and asset map. Okay. Alternatives, it gives a detailed blueprint for the future or way of doing things better in a particular situation or environment. Saying, okay, this is a food desert. You all are known as a food desert. This is what a food desert is. This is how we work with other communities. Community garden. We work with the community in Wilmer Hutchins, where they now have a community garden because they did not have access to food. And there were, and we tried I was part of the anti-poverty coalition. And so we would give them like plants to plant and things like that. But those were not sustainable. And what I feel that I'm not good. So I would have starved for especially healthy food options. So they created a community garden, and in that community garden, I think once or twice a month, in that community garden, they go and the community members and outside community members can go in there and buy like fresh fruits and vegetables. And then action, a strategy or program to achieve the specific objectives that you're trying to achieve. What change are you trying to make? What is the process for that? What program or services are needed for to make that change? And this is the social change wheel. You may see this in some of your other classes and stuff. But this is the social change wheel, and so we're looking at how do we create social change. And so all of these, and this is what you're doing right now. Community-based participatory research, so CAR. And then community organizing and advocacy. So it's a combination of all of this is what you're doing right now. Okay. Theories in CAP we looked at, and I'm not going to go into these ad nauseum. Structural functionalism. Organizations and communities respond constructively to environmental changes, reduce social tensions. So this structural functionalism is primarily known for so it says that there is a place in our society for poverty. Poverty is a normal function of our society. The structures that are there are there for a reason. And they typically predicate that on law enforcement. There's one in every community. Libraries, schools, those are institutions and structural systems that are in the community. But it also says that, like, you all are looking at poverty, or you all are looking at the different things that you're looking at, that's a normal function because it's built. Our society is built on that. If we took away, so I heard, can't remember who, but think about if we, as a society, took away poverty. What would our society look like? It's a discussion for another day. Conflict perspectives such as Marxism, critical race theory, analyze how some groups benefit more from prevailing social arrangements and how these arrangements reflect and perpetuate inequalities, social divisions, and injustices. So I'm sure you all have heard of CRT in the news, all of that, especially around schools. That critical race theory, and it's considered a conflict theory. Because it was forged out of conflict, and or it still is a conflict or a bone of contention now. Okay, symbolic interactionism, exactly what it says. We make symbols out of the interactions that we have. So think about your communities. If they start having more positive interactions with their environment, with each other, that socialization part of it, that good or bad?
But then what? Each other?
Yeah. Just depend on what examples you say. Now, there's always exceptions to that, but the relationship between power and social change is really around how we interact. So this particular one is around so think about your participants engaging with your community. Come on. Think about those community members engaging with say, the community that's right next to them, and the difference that would make in their relationships and collaboration. A lot of times that wall that we talked about, it may not be a proverbial wall. But if you never really, and for generations you've never really interacted with more affluent communities, then you're gonna always see yourself, that community, as have and have not. Just because you haven't interacted. And then social constructionism is exactly what it says. It inserts reality. What is our reality? And that's what you're looking at in your community. What is the reality? That's what you're getting to. Because the research may say one thing, but what is the reality? And that's why you're doing it, to see what's there. Like you said, you read about it, right? But it's more impactful for you to read about it and then see it. So, conducting your community impact or assessment study, how is it helpful? There's many different benefits to it. Um, Building up infrastructure in the community, urban development. So some of you all, especially like Como, I know, and I keep saying Como because that's the one I just graded and I remember. But urban development, any of you all going to the urban development, seeing what seeing what urban development is doing and where the representatives are doing. The city municipalities all have a responsibility to take care of the communities that they serve. However, that hasn't been going on because there's typically a divide between who represents. A lot of times the community members don't even know who represents. That may be something that you are educating them on. Here are your representatives. Here's how to engage with your representatives. Here's some things. Here's a one pager on what you should say, or here's some community issues. I used to go more often than I do, and than I'm able to now just because of my schedule. I used to go to community council meetings and different things where my students were in the DFW area, all of that. And a lot of times they would sit the community members down when it was time for them to talk because they would get up there and tell them what's wrong. And the representatives would be like, okay, we know what's wrong. We know that's wrong. But what is the viable solution? Nobody thought of that. So the system, right, that they were trying to engage, put it back on the community, right? You're experiencing this. Basically, they were saying, you're experiencing this. So what are you going to do about it? We're not going to allow you to stand up here in our city council meeting and just talk about it. They would say you have 90 seconds. Those different types of, to kind of, and I would also be a part of like the representatives and stuff. And they were saying that there's so many issues that each individual community member brings in that they're talking about. Some of the things that they're already addressing, some of the things they've tried to address in the past and it didn't work out or different ways. So how do we, as macro practitioners, we bring those two together? That system that they're trying to navigate and the community members, and these are the priorities or issues of the community. So they can't address everything, but they prioritize the situations or the conditions, social conditions that are in the community. And once you prioritize them, then you can start finding viable solutions. Okay. So you all are looking at the system, you're looking at the community, and you're looking at the person, the people or the person, the social needs are around your target population. Purpose is to understand what is going on in the community, like your demographics, your health, economy, all of that. That's why you do the pestle analysis as part of the history. Okay. Plan. You based on the assessment, you develop projects, programs, and policies that address the issues. And then your analysis includes the social impacts, changes in community cohesion, social networks, building those social networks, just like you all do in micro practice, right? If an individual is needing some help, what is one of the first things that we do? Build what? Support systems. The same thing is applicable to community. We're building support systems. So how do we build those support systems to support that change process, to support that community member, to support that family? So you see the interconnectedness of micro and macro practice. Economic impacts, job creation, business development, changes in local income, that production, distribution, and consumption. Doesn't have to be this big thing. It doesn't have to be an Amazon fulfillment center, right? Just something in which will create jobs, bring businesses into that area, and change the local income. Because a lot of the things that we do, we always want to talk about doing it on a federal level. But we live on this level. That's where we need the change to take place. And the good thing is local and state entities typically have some say so in that because federal law is very generalized. They don't tell them how to do it. It's up to the state and local areas, such as the Texas Education Agency, and some of the things that they're doing right now. Michael, did you have something? Yes. Here's the thing though. What people don't know is that every time there's a policy, there's typically money to implement that policy.
Before the policies in place.
When they put the policy in place. But there are municipalities. I had a student that found over $6 million that was set up in Collin County for respite care that no one was using. So the monies are there. In neighborhood planning, urban planning, and development, and everything, they have monies. And if you have a viable solution, you can sit down and talk to them. Because they have to spend those monies because those monies are allocated for that community. But see, we as professionals and as practitioners hold them accountable for doing it. But if the community members don't know about it, don't know that there's a fund over here that the city doesn't go through the city's budget line item for line item. The monies are there. However, if you don't access those money, then they just reallocate them. Nobody in the community needs them. So we vote as the council, we vote to reallocate those funds, repurpose those funds. Environmental impacts, so like land use, changes, things like that. There are landfills. There are, communities in which the city, you can actually purchase, or you can actually get, um, some land and or even a building for $1, part of the landfill, part of the repurposing of some of the buildings in there. And so when you're out there doing your windshield survey, also look for abandoned buildings. Because are they an asset? Yes, they are. Why? Yes, you can build stuff there. If we can help the communities to repurpose the things that are in their community for their usage, for them to be able to utilize, then we're building our community. And then health impacts, of course, like, food desert, windshield survey, and asset map. So mapping, if I don't know if you can see this right here, four map assessments. These are the four map assessments that we typically do in communities. When you talk about asset mapping or community, mapping, this is typically the four areas, those four map assessments. Community theme and strengths assessment is one of those. It's similar to the ABCD model, and we'll talk about that. It's ABCD, model stands for asset based community development. Okay. Uh, Local public health system assessment. So so you all are doing basically these assessments inside of your whole community impact. Community, and then forces of change assessment. Forces of change are those resources that, um, that carry change throughout the community. They usually initiate the change. Okay. And then as you can see here, I love pictures of this. You can see all of those four. So you see all of these four maps over here. And this is what they help to do. Okay. Organize for success, for partnership development, visioning. So all of these are the community themes and strengths that this really covers. These right here are covered by local public health systems and the forces of change. They are. And then here you have the evaluation, the overall health and well-being of the community. It's a good thing you all don't have to go through all those assessments. Then here's a commute. I think you all have seen this one right here. So I want to see how you all start, developing your asset maps. But in your asset maps, you're typically going to have, some of the same categories. How you design it, you and your team design it is entirely up to you. Okay, but you usually have the gifts of the individuals. This is going to be your target population. What are some positives about your target population? In your major findings, you're going to have to find the strengths, the gaps, the opportunities, and the challenges for each one of your major findings that you have. Uh-huh. The what? Oh, Padlet, Padlet. Uh-huh. Okay, so it's in our Teams channel. You access that same link each time. Yeah, and let me know if it's not working. But yes, Padlet is where you can upload some of those. In addition to take pictures while you're out there. Okay, that's going to add some people. Most people are visual learners. Okay, so taking pictures even further supports what you're saying about your community. Okay. So typically you have individual gifts of individuals. Like I said, if you're going into the community or even the individuals that the organizations that you've identified serve. What are some positive things about that about those individuals? Or what are some resources that are in the community? And around the individuals, you have citizen associations, you have local institutions, you have um, you have land, so like um, parks. Remember, we talked about some places, poverty-stricken communities, they have a park, but it's an adult park. It's not there for family members. It's not there for kids. It's not even safe for that. A lot of the equipment is in disrepair, and so the city will shut it down. We don't have a whole lot of that anymore because a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, both Dallas and Tarrant County, their neighborhood planning went into a lot of these neighborhoods, and now you'll see the nice parks there. So look and see where the parks are. Is there a park? If there are, okay, so let me say this. If there are community members there and there's no park, I use the local park to walk, to walk around. I take my grandbaby out there, when she's here for the weekend. And so things like that. People need to in these communities and stuff, a lot of times those are not present. But to run she needs to run off some of that energy. And she can't do it in that. But truly, parks and every asset in the community. Think about the assets as you're doing your projects and everything. Think about what you enjoy in your community and what if it was taken. Okay. These are techniques to assessing the community's assets and needs. So this is some data sources. I wanted to include this just because you all are going to be looking up census data, US Census data, interviews, your key informant interview. Remember your key informant interview, all of you all do not have to interview the person. Okay. If you know about the community because you work there or whatever, you know about the community, then you could actually be that key informant in your group. Okay. The key informant is around the issue, not the organization. Because a lot of times the organizations are so far removed from the issue. And you can talk to community members. I've had students to go and talk to the local law enforcement, convenience stores. Okay. But always use your intuition. If it doesn't, if you don't feel safe, don't. Okay. I'm not too worried about the key informant, interview, but if you can interview someone, even calling the organization. Who is the gatekeeper of most organizations? Who do you talk to when you call an organization? Yeah, you may, but a lot of times you talk to the administrative assistant. right?
The secretary.
Yeah, the secretary, right? They are a wealth of information. A lot of times they run the company because they know all the ins and outs. And they don't have, a lot of times they don't have that added responsibility of having to make the decisions. So they can step back and give you a point of view on the issue or what they've seen or what, what services they have and or just their personal opinion about the issue. Is it a problem in the community? Okay. Community survey, you typically don't have time for that. Family and friends that may be familiar with. Visit local businesses and organizations, and then like art projects. If you go into some of the city halls and everything, they have like a history of the community, and you can take pictures of those that art that's there. So utilize all of the resources that are out there.
In New York,
Mhm.
the subway station, a project. It makes it look nicer for people. Like
Yes.
even now they're doing it for graffiti and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They like find a space that they let people tag or create a mural. And
Yes.
it's the intention is to the aesthetic of the
Yes. And they have a lot of them in South Dallas. Great artists. I mean, should be, in an art museum. But they are indicative of their lived experience in that community, their connection to that community. On Lancaster Avenue, Heather runs the Art of Living. So I'm not sure who has. Okay, yeah. Um, the art, Heather has been there forever. In at the Art of Living. So if you want to go in there, she's very open and everything, but it's a program for that they are able to come in and do expressive art. They have art classes and different things because there's a lot of great artists and they typically will have it like a showcase over there, and it's the art of all these everyone who's come through there who's been homeless or threatened to be homeless. Assessing your HSO. So what you're going to look at is that organization, not just how long they've been there, but how are their services and programs actually helping the community? What services and programs do they have? Is it addressing your social issue? Is there something that they can do as an organization that would be little or no money, right? Because for that community garden that I talked about, it costs the community nothing. Lowe's and Walmart have given, and every corporate structure, Target, all of them, all of them have a community fund that most people do not tap into. But community members don't know about it. And then it's too small of a money. Now, it may not be enough money or it may not be um, gratuitous for, say, the organization to do it. But you can be a small organization, an entrepreneur. You can write a proposal to Walmart, any of the, organizations that are in the community. They have to, or they But what that means is that if it's not being used and they reallocate it, then that's less money for the social service. So then you build another chasm of lack. Society. Okay. So you're looking at their mission and purpose. Look at their results. A lot of you, some of you all have found like strategic plans that they have or whatever. Look in. Okay, so good thing about macro, right? You can use newspaper. You're doing schools and you're looking. I think one group is doing school. Texas Tribune has so much data on schools, their report card, all of those different. Okay, so use newspaper articles. Use things that are applicable to your community. Sometimes that's newsletters, right? That are in the community. I'm like you, I didn't even know about the Como community and everything. But then last year when I had a student group that did their community assessment over that and start Googling and things like that, so many different things came up. So use newspaper articles, because there's not going to be a whole lot of research, participatory action research typically. There's not a whole lot of research that you're going to find, like research journal articles and things on Como, Texas, or on Lancaster Avenue, or South Dallas. You will find newspaper articles. Even older for your historical part. Okay, so utilize all of those conditions and external systems. So, what partnerships do they have? That's a part of your assessing your HSO assignment. What partnerships do they have? What's their structure? What is their infrastructure? Who do they serve? The people who are because I think one of the prompts or questions asks who are the board of directors, and it asks for that for the specific reason that you can see where the decision makers are coming. Because it typically lists what type of profession they're in. Social work. Okay. We need to be in there though. So building infrastructure, governance over, like I said, there's a lot of organizations out there that have community giving funds. Walmart, Target, um, Ross, Marshall, all of those stores have a community giving fund. But you know what they say? Community doesn't need. So they've been reallocated. Tools and performance systems. Yes, they can steal the nearest walk. Oh. Yeah, typically Walmart and Target or all of them are more regional. Even the major grocery stores. So like if there's a Kroger nearby, HEB, whatever's nearby that.
And how does that, who will that do that? Use contact them.
So you can go on their website. It's typically says community giving or community engagement or community. It typically says something that means that they allocate those services. Yeah.
And how do they end up actually doing that to like explain?
So you have to write like a proposal. What are you going to do with it? You're gonna start a program or you're gonna start a project, what are you gonna do with it? So like your projects that you all are doing when you all get to your advocacy and everything, depending on what it is, you can go to the local stores and they will fund.
Okay.
And let you know if you need any help with it. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. And then here's another picture, me in the picture. Here's another around the family unit. You have all of these different. So have you all done genograms and all of the?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you've seen something similar. Now think about it as all of those networks that's surrounding school for jobs for the adults, school for the kids, right? Looking at, because when you do, whether you do micro, especially if you do micro, you're not going to be just working with that child. You're not going to be just working with that adult or that senior or whatever. You're going to be working with the family. So you got to build up social supports around that. You got to get them services and everything. A lot of that is you working with the family unit. Because if you help just the one and put them back in the same environment without impacting that environment, what is going to happen? Say if there's a child that's being abused, take that child out, you do a forensic, they go through the forensic interviewing, they go through all of that, and then the parents go, or the parent or parents go through whatever they need to go through to get the child back. But they've just kind of gone through the motions, right? Instead of that one that's helping the child also coordinating and holding accountable everyone else that's in the family. Because you can give that child or whomever all of the interpersonal skills, problem solving, and everything else. You put them back in the environment with no one else who knows those strategies, they're going to revert back to the same behavior that they're. I work with kids in Kaufman and Hunt County. I work with kids out there. And some of those kids, all I did with them was play games, little board games and, little coloring games and things like that, drawings and things like that. But who I gave the actual, this is what you need to do. You need to put in some boundaries. You need to make a behavior chart. You need to do this. You need to reward them and all of that. That was the caregiver thing. And talk to the about, okay, there's going to be some new rules, or what rules did you and your family talk about this week, or those different types of things. So you're bringing them into the process, but at the same time, they cannot process all of that you have to give. And you're not with them, but maybe once a month. You see them once a month in therapy for psychosocial therapy. You see them once a month. There's not, change cannot take place. So you're gonna have to put some support for that behavior change, for that problem solving in place. So you're typically not working just with that one individual. Public health and human service agencies, public human service organizations such as employment, education, philanthropic circles and organizations, academic institutions. So all of those are the different types of organizations and different types of systems, macro systems that your community may have to engage with. Make sense? All right. Let's see. Yep, that's all. Questions, comments? I know that was a lot, but I wanted to get that review in because as we move forward, like your major findings and things like that, don't worry about that right now, okay? But we're gonna see how we then take all the information that you gathered from your windshield survey, from assessing the HSO, and now we're going to start building a picture of that community and that advocacy. Okay? All right. Uh, so the activity 2 windshield survey and asset map has been extended. So you have until next week to do that. Make sure that you see that there's also a discussion there. Okay. And then I think assessing an HSO is not until before we leave out for spring break, right? Okay. Question? Everybody find it? Okay. Excellent, excellent. Thank you all so very much. Have a great weekend. Don't work too hard. Okay. Don't work too hard. But you may receive something from me at like 2 or 3 o'clock. So yeah, just kind of move on. That's my time, a lot of time. You will remember it when you got outside.